What does it take to make workshops work? And how can we facilitate collaboration that sticks and leads to results? My name is Maere, and with the Workshops Work podcast, I am on the mission to find the magic ingredients that make workshops work. Today with me on the show is Charles-Louis Lemare, and we embark on a juicy exploration of what it means to be a facilitator. We speak about the invisible facilitator and with the facilitator as a magician. So stay tuned. And by the way, if you don't have pen and paper at hand to take your own notes, scroll down to the show notes to download my free one-page summary. And now, lean back and be inspired. Charles-Louis, welcome to the show. I am thrilled to finally have you here.
Thank you, Miriam. I'm really thrilled to be here as well. We've contacted each other a couple of times, and then we finally found a day that works.
Yes. And you have been recommended by so many previous guests already that I'm thrilled to finally have the honor to geek out about facilitation with you.
Thank you. I'm really curious about what we're going to talk about today.
The topic. Me too. I'm curious where we will land. We have a few pointers, and let's just dive right in. I always start with the same question. When did you start calling yourself a facilitator? And I assume you do.
I think it's when I heard others call me that. It's a funny story because I grew up with a computer keyboard in my hand, so I did some software programming and stuff like that. Then I discovered the realm of extreme programming and Scrum-mastering and all these things that end with ing, like also agile coaching. At some point, I stumbled into a book called Agile Retrospectives, Making Good Teams Great by Esther Darby and Deanna Larson. It actually dissected the way that retrospectives could be, I'll say, conducted at that point, because I didn't really understand the word facilitation at that point. And by trying it out, I discovered that there's a whole realm of stuff that one can do. And fast forwards a couple of years later, and then suddenly people called me facilitator, and I'm like, oh, what's that? And
Google facilitator.
Exactly.
And it's interesting that you mentioned that. Just now I sent out an email to my podcast guests because I've been dreaming of publishing a book called What We Talk About When We Talk About Facilitation. Mm. And so I'm curious, what do you mean nowadays when you say facilitation? And why did these people put the label on you for doing what exactly?
So it might be a bit of a strange thing, because it's like whenever you start to name something, it puts a label and people start to understand something about it. And the whole point about facilitation is, in my view, is to be invisible. And so once we start naming it, it becomes not invisible. And people start focusing on it, but they should not focus on that. They should focus on doing the work. And what I talk about is, and sometimes clients ask me, hey, what's your agenda for this session? How are you going to do this? And I'm like, hey, if we could just, focus on what's the outcome, you're probably very experienced at your work and at getting the right people together and so on. So I will let you focus on that. And I will construct is maybe not the right word. I will whip out a kind of agenda, program, whatever, that will change as soon as we start it anyway. And what I do want is that we have sync points where we can discuss. And basically at every break, when all the others go for coffee or whatever, we sync and we say, okay, what happens next?
Yeah. And so if I understand you correctly, you wouldn't share your agenda with the client because it changes anyway, or you don't share it because you don't want them to take ownership and to start co-designing it or maybe dominating it?
I'll start with I don't know. Why? To me, there's this. So maybe it is about this co-designing. What I do with my client and my partners is that we build together towards an outcome. Mm-hmm. And so what we talk about when we're together in the preparation session is like, okay, what's the whole picture of the setting? What's your, let's say, objective? What is it that you want to try to achieve? Who do you need to get to that?
Mm-hmm.
And how do you see that happening? And what are maybe some blind spots? Of course, this is a strange question to ask whenever you ask about blind spots, because, obviously you don't see them. But it's like, I try to kind of find the whole terrain, the playground, if I can say so. And then usually, okay, maybe rewind a little bit. People get in touch with me because they've heard about me. So word of mouth.
Mm-hmm.
So that's maybe an advantage where I don't have to explain how I work, because they've heard from others that when we work together, we get to a certain goal. And I loved it. A couple of months ago, I was in a conversation with a client of mine who suggested me to some of his colleagues. And so we were discussing this whole playground thing. And then the person, who's the IT director, told his colleagues, hey, by the way, this whole discussion that you're having with Charles-Louis will give some directions, but be aware that we might not end up where you wanted to. However, it will be much more relevant what we do together.
Yeah. And isn't it because the moment you discuss with the client, they only have their own perspective, but then what makes a workshop or valuable, or why they call you in the first place, is because of the people dynamics. So because it is a constant change that you cannot predict.
Yeah.
And I love what you said, that you get recommended and clients reach out to you because of the work you have done for others in the past. And over the past month, maybe year, I'm thinking a lot about our facilitation signatures. What is it that makes us unique? And for me, this is part of a signature where this is how you do things. And I'm sure that it would translate in many other things as you do them.
It's funny you mentioned that, because just last week I told you I was in Lithuania. I did some work there for a couple of clients. And with 3 or 4 different people, I had that conversation where I say, I'm really bad at marketing. I don't know how to market myself on selling my stuff. What I find easier, however, and this may tie back to the whole signature you talk about, what I find easier is when I go to conferences, I run workshops. And what I try to bring in these workshops is a full experience from start to finish, so that people who leave the workshop can already apply it at their own context. Why do I do that? Well, first of all, people have paid for their ticket, mostly. Maybe their employer did, but at some point there's like, they've paid for their ticket to go to the conference. Secondly, and again, this is my world, my worldview, whatever, I think if I give them a taster of something, it's like a trap, because they might not understand the whole width of the spectrum of what they need to know or do in order to apply it. So I'd rather give a session that is fully contained, where they have enough place to experiment with it, to try to fail, to ask their own questions and bring it back to their own context. And then either they can do it and hooray, fantastic, and they can do it without me, which also leaves me more time. And if they liked my approach and maybe they think of me for some other stuff, I'm like, we're all adults here. They can reach out to me on LinkedIn. They can call me or whatever. But I'm like, I don't want to force myself onto others. I'd rather have that as a kind of, hey, let's do something together.
Yeah, I think that's the entire idea of air quotes content marketing, right? So instead of saying what you're selling, just providing content and experiences in your case, and letting them then decide whether they need you and want more of you or not.
Yeah.
And now I'm curious. So when you work with clients, do you have an agenda for yourself that you ditch? Or is it just something that you don't share with them? And then what is the difference in your design process when you design for an audience that you don't know, that will walk into a workshop that you host, for instance, at a conference?
I think in both cases, I kind of have a similar approach. I have an idea of a goal or an objective. Of course, when I'm teaching something, for instance, teaching, so in October, I ran a workshop to let people experiment with clean language.
Mm.
And the idea was there, okay, they need to understand it, but it's much more than just the questions. And how different clean language is from maybe coaching or from trying to fix the other and so on. So my idea was, okay, let's experiment with a couple of questions there and then try and see based on the debriefing,
Mm-hmm.
I would figure out, and maybe I trust myself enough or I'm arrogant enough, I don't know. But like I would figure out what would be the next most useful step. And for instance, at some point, based on the questions after we tried a couple of conversations with what kind of X is I don't know how familiar you are with clean language and maybe
I recorded a podcast on clean language.
Okay, all right. But maybe the listeners are not familiar. So
thank you.
Yes. So there's a couple of questions with clean language where basically you ask something, for instance, what is facilitation like for you, Miriam? And then you would answer me something. And then I would pick a word from what you're saying. And then I would ask you, hey, what kind of X is that X?
Mm-hmm.
And X being the word that you use. And then is there anything else about that X? So these are two, I would say I call them the Pareto questions, because with these two questions, you can do most of the work. So I let the group experiment with these two questions. And then based on the feedback that I heard during the debriefing, I realized that many people were going into the realm of coaching and individual coaching and so on. And I wanted them also to realize that it can be used for much more than that.
Mm.
So the next activity I called out of my magic hat was, hey, how different is clean language from any other things that we experiment with? And then I sent people into groups and then they had to discuss together. And so based on that, I built upon knowing that I had, I think it was an hour and a half to close off the session, but I wanted to make sure that people had one experience. Based on the feedback, I added another exercise. Then we did another round of experimentation with the clean questions, and then a wrap up with potential other questions to make sure that people could use it afterwards.
Yeah. And what I hear, and I wonder whether, and maybe I'm just seeking to validate my own approach to facilitation. But what I hear is that your strongest facilitation tool is the question.
Mm-hmm.
And then based on the question, things happen with the group. And basically, you don't need many more other activities than breaking out into small groups, bringing them back together for a debrief, asking another question, breaking them out, coming together.
Yeah. And then having tools in my backpack like Tyagi activities, like different kinds of games or liberating structures, like any other things are just a bonus, a sugar coating. But in the end, it's always small groups reflecting, coming back. Sometimes it's small groups, mixing small groups again, and then coming back. And this is something which surprises people in a good way,
Mm-hmm.
And even, like you were also asking about working with special clients on specific works and so on, because there I told you about something when I'm teaching something, be it a conference somewhere else. But sometimes also when we have specific work to do, sometimes I can surprise people and this works especially well online, by inviting guests who are expert in some specific topics, and then they come in for an hour. They provide maybe some insights on specific stuff that I usually don't master, but that they need at that point, because I know it's a workshop on that kind of thing or that kind of thing. And then I invite guests who can share that. And they don't know that in advance.
Beautiful. So it's a special guest.
Yeah.
Bonus, the cherry on the cake.
Yeah.
Maybe. Interesting. And you mentioned Tyagi exercises, and I wouldn't want not to ask the question. What is Tyagi exercise? I've heard of Tyagi group, but I wouldn't know what a Tyagi exercise is.
Okay, so basically the Tyagi group, so Sivasalam Tyagarajan he's more than 80 years old. And he's a good friend and mentor in everything which is facilitation and teaching for me. And a Tyagi exercise is, I think if the correct label is a Tyagi frame game, which is an activity that you can tweak and use and apply into different contexts. One example of a Tyagi frame game is, for instance, let's say the Hello game.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if you're familiar with the Hello game, but if you're not, and maybe the audience is not, so the Hello game is basically a way that you can get a huge group of people to align on something very quickly. You gather a group, you split them into 4 groups, and every group has their own question. For instance, what do you expect from today workshop? A second one, what criticism do you have on the methods that we're applying, or something like that? So like you have 4 different questions. But the idea is that you tell the people before they're split into 4 groups that they'll need to interview every single person in the room. Step 1, 3 minutes in your own group. Find a strategy to get answers from everyone in the room. 3 minutes. Step 2, 3 minutes. Run around in the room and try to gather answers from everyone in the room. This is usually chaos, but a very structured chaos. And it's something which is amazing to witness. Step 3, come back to your own group. Again, 3 minutes to put all the answers together. And then step 4, every group has 1 minute to kind of present their summary to everyone else. And of course, with that summary starts the whole meat of the game, because this is where we start playing with content.
Mm-hmm.
And in 15 minutes, you can have 80 people align on many different things.
I am fascinated. I just try to picture the mess of people running around and interviewing each other. And I think what it shows, and that's the beauty maybe, that usually even large groups can self-coordinate ways better than we expect. And sometimes the less structure and less instructions we give them, the better they align. Because we could ask them, try to speak with as many people as possible, and then it will be chaos. But having them to succeed in a goal, in a mission, we have limited time, I need to interview a lot of people, every one of us needs to interview a lot of people, then suddenly you become very time efficient because you're on a mission.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, and I think this putting people on a mission is a key differentiator, perhaps, in this whole facilitation thing, because you told earlier about having a question and then small groups and so on, and maybe to random passers-by, yes, it's small groups, right? Oh, we're in breakout groups again. And I can totally get that. But I think you nailed it when you said about putting people on a mission. And I think this is what I try to achieve in my workshops.
Yeah.
I gave them one instruction, one mission. You have 5 minutes to do this. Figure it out.
Yeah. What I also realize in what you said is the importance to vary the energy level. Because if we just ask a question, put people into breakout and come back to debrief, back into a question, it's always the same kind of constant energy.
Yeah.
Which might be exciting in the beginning. At some point, it just gets draining.
Yeah.
So with this mission, some time pressure, some standing up, doing something, you really vary the energy level in the space.
Oh, yes.
Which can also be done online.
Yeah. And also something that I discovered, especially with this one question, one mission. So last week I was teaching at Vinted in Vilnius, and it's a facilitation learning track. We also do some public ones with Francis Lalaman, who is also on this show, and it's called Kishotenketsu. But we were all about this whole one instruction at a time, because it gives focus and it gives a mission. And the people in the room were like a bit like, yeah, but what happens next? So why should we do this? What's the overall goal? Tell me what happens next. And it's hard not to answer these questions as a facilitator, but also if I reveal too much, then the thing is we might lose some creativity.
Mm-hmm.
And it's something also when I ask a question, usually when I ask for confirmation where people know what to be done, I ask, is it vague enough?
I love that. Yeah. Again, I find it fascinating how it's just part of the way how we do things. And some feel more comfortable with this ambiguity than others, facilitators and participants. A colleague of mine, Thomas Lanthaler, also on the show, he loves to play with ambiguity. And he always gives not enough information about the next thing, the instructions. And participants love and hate it at the same time. Yeah. And this just gives this extra energy, this extra curiosity, maybe a little bit of
uncomfortable.
Discomfort. That then, if you can channel it in the right direction, brings the extra spark and energy.
That's the thing. That's the thing, because discomfort, one of the people in that training last week also mentioned this, discomfort actually also created more trust in the group.
Yes. If I think there's a condition. So the discomfort creates trust in the group. If as a facilitator, you can hold that space. And I think that's a real art then. As you said in the very beginning, the facilitator is supposed to be invisible and still hold the space very strongly. Yeah. So, because otherwise, if the participants don't trust that you understand that you know what comes next.
Yes.
And that you have an idea of the process. If they don't trust you on that, then it will be full chaos.
Yeah. And the beautiful thing, coming back to what happened last week, so like it was on 2 days on site. And on the first day, there was this discomfort. Oh, what happens next? What happens next? On the second day, they had to themselves facilitate a couple of exercises. And then they realized also how the group sometimes needed more guidance, but they had to say, kind of, hey, trust us, trust the process. And it was really beautiful to see this whole group come to peace with that level of discomfort and trusting the facilitators to take care of them or of the space.
I love that. And I wonder whether it also creates a very different group dynamic, because in every group, subgroup, you always have the one who says, yes, but the instructions were the following. And the other one who says, yeah, but it doesn't make sense. Let's delve into it and see what happens, right? And then you have this kind of conversation where suddenly the group spends more time discussing about the instructions than doing the exercise. If deliberately you choose to have very little instructions, suddenly the group has to trust itself and find it out themselves and just do something so that they get to the doing much faster.
I love it. Yeah.
I haven't thought of that before, but that's what came up when I listened to you.
Yeah, me neither. And I think you're onto something. It's just enough so that they have to do something anyway. Is it the right understanding or not? Who cares? But let's just do something. And I think you talked also about the whole some people also being aware of time, but a vague enough instruction and a short time box allows to iterate and loop.
Yes. Yeah, failing forward. And sometimes then things come up because the different understanding.
Yeah.
On the air quotes misunderstanding. And then suddenly you discuss about something that wasn't on the menu or on the agenda, but which was exactly the thing that had to be discussed at this point in time.
Yeah. And on that point, I have a story that I'm going to share, which is a bit funny and not funny at the same time. So last year I was facilitating another cohort for a client of mine where we had also some online sessions. And so in my calendar, the session was in the afternoon, and in the morning I had to drive my father-in-law to the airport at some point. And so at 5 to 9, I start receiving messages by the group saying, hey, will you send us the Zoom link for today's session? And I'm like, yeah, you'll get it, but we meet in the afternoon, right? And the other said, no, my calendar says we meet in 3 minutes. So, it's going to be at 9 a.m. And I was supposed to drive my father-in-law at 9:30. So like, oops. Yeah, exactly. Oops. What happens then? So basically, I said, okay, I'll just open up a Zoom room and then we'll see what happens. I had a plan, as we discussed, I had a couple of ideas what they could do. We were going to talk anyway about some myths around learning and facilitation. So I had some text and articles that they could read. And so I said, hey, this is the situation. Okay. In a couple of minutes, I'll be gone. Talking about invisible facilitator. Right? So in a couple of minutes, I'll be gone. But I would like you to do some work because some people were already saying we can reschedule. I'm like, I'm not rescheduling. I mean, there's one of me and there's 12 of you, trying to find something that works for everyone. And we were nearing the end of the cohort. So that made no sense. So then I said, hey, you'll have 3 groups. Group 1 will work on this, group 2 will work on that, and group 3 will work on that. And basically, I'll be gone roughly for an hour. So I'll ask you so who's going to be the kind of main facilitator? Somebody said, okay, I'm going to organize breakouts and so on. Okay. And then the others, I said, hey, just have maybe a couple of iterations, 10 minutes, 15 minutes on the text. And you need to prepare something like a kind of a summary of what you got from these texts. Because I'll be off the grid for an hour.
Yeah. And you put them on a mission.
I put them on a mission. And then I was kind of stressed during the whole drive. Then I came back. And then that was really interesting because one group had a kind of a presentation. Another one had called in ChatGPT to make a slide deck out of it. But then in the debriefing, I said, hey, basically, ChatGPT hasn't understood the text because it's putting some really wrong stuff in there. And then the third one had said the article you sent us was too complex. So we don't have anything. And I'm like, hey, this is great. This is because basically then we started working on the whole purpose of iterations, on the purpose of facilitation, how you hold the space and so on. So I said, okay, when did you realize that text was too complex? Well, we realized as soon as we started diving into that. And so hey, when you came back after the first iteration, what did you discuss with the facilitator? Like, did you discuss maybe some alternate options? Maybe instead of doing the whole text, doing one chapter, one specific? No, we didn't. And so again, this was actually a great opportunity to talk about this whole holding the space and iterating and adapting.
Yeah, the role of the facilitator, how learning happens. Yeah, the entire meta level.
Yeah.
And the role of AI and how much you can trust it to actually take over some tasks and how dangerous it is to delegate to ChatGPT if you don't understand yourself.
Yes, because basically the text I was giving them without telling them that, a lot of them were also about learning myths. So they were talking about stuff. And actually, in the end, they were saying, hey, basically, this is a myth. So unless you went through the text and really read it, you would think that this was a thing.
Yeah, that it was serious. And then it becomes very dangerous because ChatGPT doesn't understand irony.
No, it doesn't.
Not yet.
Not yet, maybe.
Fascinating. So if it's not the absence of the facilitator that makes a workshop fail, what makes a workshop fail for you?
Yeah, what makes a workshop fail? I think there's a couple of pillars. Usually I talk about the holy trinity of workshops.
Of failure? Oh, okay.
No, I'm not of failure. Well, basically, in order for a workshop to work, what's important is to have the right people in the room. Mm-hmm. That's one thing. So if I flip it, not the right people in the room. Like, maybe take people that have all the titles and all the roles, but don't do the work. Mm-hmm. And so they make decisions without knowing what impact it has on the people who do the work.
Yeah.
So that's one thing. So the right people. The second one is the right topic. Mm. If the topic is too vague, too broad, too whatever, like, hey, let's fix global poverty. Okay, where do we start? Like, this is the thing. But if you narrow it down, so also this means that you need to do the homework before you start the workshop, and again, the right people is also the people who have done their homework, because if they come and they don't have their homework done, we're going to look at each other's eyes for a couple of time and expect the facilitator to do things. So like, first, the right people, again, I'm flipping it. So in order for it to fail is not the right people, a topic that isn't ready for working on. And the third one is the right time. Mm. If you do a workshop too early, who cares? If it's too late, well, why do the workshop? Because you need action, you need to fix the things. It's like you won't have the time and the space to reflect and to experiment with stuff.
Yeah, makes sense. And when you say homework, I'd be curious what you mean by that, and whether it's something literal that you ask people to do, or whether it's more something that they're doing anyway. Because, I mean, everyone is overworked.
Yes.
Nowadays. And it's difficult to expect anyone to do something. And there's nothing worse than opening the room, starting the session, and then half has done the homework, the other half hasn't. And then where do you start? If you give them time to do it right there, then you're basically disregarding those who have complied.
And I've had some situations on that also last year, where a couple of people had done their homework, but it was more like 10%. And then they had to prepare something based on their homework. And those who had done their work said, what we had just there, what for me was so I don't recall exactly what they said, but they were actually very sad, because the conversations could have been much more interesting had the others also done their homework.
Yeah.
And so they saw the catastrophe of not having done the homework.
Yeah. So how would you now deal with the situation?
So I don't know how I would deal with this situation now. Maybe one thing is, if it's a one-shot workshop, it's not like I have many, many options to say, hey, no problem, but I hope that next time you'll do the homework, right?
Yeah.
So what I do now is, like, I could say, hey, in groups, figure out what were the 5 most important ideas. And maybe if people haven't done it, hey, you'll have to be with the groups anyway. Because so I tell people to do it and to check some things in advance. And as you say, people are overworked anyway. So I kind of assume that not everyone will have done it. But then it's about designing something which makes it okay for people to show up without having done their homework.
So then basically where those who have done it maybe share it.
Yeah.
Or those who haven't done it to be the kind of or the interviewers who ask curious questions to those who have done it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I, at the same time, I try not to point fingers like, hey, those who haven't done their homework, you go to group A, and those who have done, you go to D, because that puts a kind of an awkward, weird feeling. And it kind of also probably gives the impression that I'm okay with people not doing their homework.
Interesting one, yes.
And I'm not sure if I'm okay or not okay with that. It's more that, like, this is not part of, if I ask people to come prepared, it's not like I'm okay with them not doing that, because it will take some time anyway from the group.
And I think also you being okay or not okay sounds like you being the judge.
Yeah.
And this kind of contradicts to your vision of who the facilitator is.
Exactly.
This invisible force. You're not the teacher who's like, no.
It's not my place. It's not my place, but it's probably something. If that happens, it probably tells them something about their organization or their work or whatever. And who, as you say, who am I to judge that?
Yeah. And I think it's such a sensitive dance where, of course, we have to point it out that some people didn't do their homework, because we have to design and we have to deal with the situation. And still, as you said, the moment where we publicly shame them, even if it's in a very kind or soft manner, it does something to the mood, to the dynamic.
To the group.
It will impact their creativity, their openness, the safe space.
Yeah.
So I think it's very delicate to deal with.
Yeah. And another thing also, I think, and this ties into that, at some point, I kind of make sure that they know where the whole responsibility lies. Yes, I'm responsible in designing the whole workshop and in making sure that I put all my energy so that something useful comes out of that. And at the same time, when they call me for a one-off workshop or for a specific program in order to learn something or whatever, The key thing they need to know is that tomorrow I'll be gone.
Yeah.
One day I might even die. Who knows? I mean, yeah, that will happen someday.
For sure, hopefully. Sorry.
But no, it's okay. But it's like, I mean, it's your thing.
Yeah. And then again, it's this, reminding them of their own responsibility. And this is now something that came up a couple of times in our conversation, is trusting them that they can deal with little instructions, trusting them that they will self-organize once you put them on their mission.
Yeah.
Trusting them that they will pick up the threads once you left, and trusting them that they know that doing the homework is important.
Mm. Yeah.
Yeah.
It ties back into this whole invisible facilitator thing. And also, well, I heard you say that back to me. It's like treating them as adults.
Yeah.
You know, like, hey, we're all responsible folks here. We probably have a family or parents to take care of and whatever. We have bought a house. We have, we manage our lives. So why would I kind of tell you, hey, put this post-it exactly here? No, not there. It's like...
Interesting. This reminds me also of the episode I recorded about clean language, where you don't tell them where to put the sticky note, because whether it's on the right or the left or the up and the down can have an impact on the conversation and the dynamic.
Exactly.
So I think it's also what you said, that clean language is more than just asking questions. It's almost an entire mindset and attitude towards the group and facilitation. And I remember from our exploration call that you have facilitated around the globe.
Yes.
So traveled a lot, working with lots of cultures. Can you apply the same mindset or the same way of doing in any culture? Because I'm thinking of cultures where you have more of a hierarchy, more of the need for instructions and leadership and order.
Okay. So I'm going to start again with my favorite answer. I don't know. What I do know is, like, I've worked with Francis Lalaman also with some NGOs in East and Southeast Asia. And from what I know from East and Southeast Asia is it's not Europe.
Ta-da.
Right? So, and also, for instance, that was last year, I ran some cohorts on facilitation and like how to do effective facilitation. It was online, but with a group of feminists of the Philippines who started at the early days of lockdown as a support group for people who stayed at home and who basically they call them a support group for survivors of gender-based violence. Because you stay at home and this violence happens and so on. And over the months and years, they had also expanded to be a whole thing about the gender spectrum, diversity, sexuality and reproductive health, and the whole concept also of pleasure for women, and pleasure basically also for all the genders. But it's like owning up all that. So like topics that are kind of very, very sensitive.
Yeah.
And basically I arrived there. I mean, it was online, but I arrived there and I had these 6 women and I was like, hey, so first of all, you might not have noticed, but I'm like this white middle-aged man. I'm not from the Philippines. I don't know what it is to be a woman. And there's so many things that I don't know. And I want to make sure that this doesn't become some kind of colonialist white middle-aged men telling you whatever you need to do and whatever you need to know. And I said, no, it's fine. I mean, what we want from you is to explore facilitation topics and techniques. And I'm like, okay, but what I need from you is also that you tell me when the techniques that we experience, whether they work or not. We need to work that way. Otherwise, and they said, yeah, of course. So I'm not sure this answers your question. Maybe it's more like about finding a way to work together.
Thank you for the example. What I hear is the need for voicing the obvious Southeast Asia is not Europe.
I'm not a woman.
Voicing the obvious in the sense of, okay, here I am, a white middle-aged man who doesn't know how it is to be a woman.
In the Philippines.
In the Philippines and so many other layers.
Yeah. I mean,
so to make the implicit explicit, or to state the obvious, maybe.
Yeah.
And thereby giving the opportunity to voice what could be the impact of that. And I think it brings also the humility of, okay, I'm here to learn as well and to explore that. Did they ever give you the feedback that, oh, this technique wouldn't work for us?
Actually, they didn't. So we explored, many facilitation techniques. And one thing, we talked about clean language, but that was something that was a huge success for them because they suddenly started imagining applying it when having conversation with the survivors in a way that they said, this is fantastic. This will give them the space without us entering into empathy, oh, that must be horrible and blah, blah, blah. But this will give them the space to tell their stories fully and be heard.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
Yeah. I had the question and it disappeared, and I'm sure it will be back. Anyway, another question will appear.
Yeah. And you can pretend that it was the same.
Exactly.
I will never know.
Exactly. We talked about, okay, I lost it.
So I don't know if these intercultural, because that's one example. So you asked whether these facilitation techniques and approach would work in different cultures. So I said that I started with, I don't know, and that with some of the examples that I had, I'm not sure it's a cultural thing, though it's probably about finding the level of appropriateness, which may be a thing.
And
for the exchanges to happen.
Yeah, and maybe coming back also to what you said earlier. So if the facilitator, assuming that the facilitator is invisible, what role does culture play?
Exactly.
And what does play a big role is cultural awareness. So when you step into the room and you have your idea of a flow and then sensing what works, what doesn't, and where do you need to adjust to give more space, less space, and maybe at some point more time to explore the space without instructions.
Yeah. Yes. That also reminds me that in the early months of lockdown, I did some story listening workshops, and basically the frame of that, and of course I'm going to tell you, and it might make no sense, but hey, is we picked a fairy tale, and then I would read the fairy tale, and then we would debrief on how that resonated, what we learned from it, how it was. And in the early months of lockdown, this was really something where it was like, hey, pay whatever you think is fair. And we had people from all over the world, from different continents, joining together. And what was really beautiful is that some people said, hey, this is almost like a diversity and inclusion or belonging exercise without even needing it. Because the story was the starting point, and then people could have conversation and how that resonated. And in doing so, they learned also about other people's contexts and cultures and stuff like that. So that was really amazing.
Yeah, I can totally see that. Because I think fairy tales, they always have this core that everyone can relate to because it's deeply human. And then the fluff around it that is very cultural.
Yeah, exactly.
But, yeah. And what you mentioned, or the story that you shared about the Philippines, then reminded or made me curious about the relevance of content knowledge for the facilitator. So how important is it to have or not to have any content expertise when you facilitate groups?
My view is that if I work with groups, and I don't necessarily need content knowledge. And again, this was also a specific story where they wanted options to facilitate maybe difficult workshops where suddenly they had to also bring these topics to the village place where these are taboo topics and stuff like that. So, so they needed these options. And I think you mentioned that I was also there to learn, right?
Mm-hmm.
This was a session. I mean, this was not a session. There was a cohort that was organized over a couple of months. Basically, I think we started somewhere in October and then we ended, I think it was March 8th. It was really funny because it was on International Women's Day that the whole thing ended. But in working together, I grew a little bit also in my understanding of their context. And at some point, they also shared how difficult it was for them when they went to organizations to find some support and some, either sponsoring, or they wanted to go to these organizations to say, hey, we'd like to run some workshops in your organization, also to kind of open up but it was like about finding how to bring these topics to the top management. And so we could work together on that as well. Again, yes, now I know a little bit about the context of the Philippines and so on. But in working together, we could also find some options that they could use when talking to their potential partners.
Yeah. And as you spoke, I was just thinking that not knowing about the context, not being a woman, not being Filipina, might also take away the false assumptions. Because sometimes it's so easy to think that we can relate, but actually we cannot. Oh, yes, I know how this feels. No, I don't.
No, I don't.
Just because I know how it is to be a woman doesn't mean that I can relate to every woman in the world. And I was maybe a weird example, but I'm thinking back of experiences of women going to the gynecologist. And many women would say that they prefer to go to a male doctor because they're much more gentle.
Yeah.
And ask many more questions because they cannot relate.
Yes, yeah. I mean, my wife says the same thing. She changed gynecologist because at first it was a woman, and then she went to a male, and then it was much better. And so, yeah, it is. I mean, I can relate to what you say, even though I cannot relate totally.
Yes. Here we go.
Yeah, and that this whole not knowing too much. This afternoon, while I was thinking about our call, I also thought about some stories where sometimes people would call me and say, oh, let me tell you about the people who will be in the workshop. And in the past, I used to say, no, I don't need to know. But now sometimes I really feel that it's important for them to tell me. So what I just do, I let it flow over me because whatever they tell me is their own perspective on these people. Because most of the times, whatever they tell me about these doesn't even materialize in the workshop. I don't know if you're familiar with that kind of situation.
Oh, yes. I think it almost always happens. And since I try to have conversation with all participants, I usually have conversation with the majority of the participants. And then it's very interesting to then also meet these people.
Oh, yeah.
And yeah, in the beginning, I also felt reluctant. Or do I want to hear it? And now I think it actually tells me a lot about the person who shares the information.
Yes.
It also, I think, informs me about potential dynamics that might happen in the room.
And that reminds me, a couple of years ago, I was invited to help an organization kind of change a little bit on their agile organization. Basically, without going too much into details, they wanted to get the product owners outside of the IT so that they could be really focused on business. So, like, they wanted to get the role out of the IT department, and then some people from the business side would take on these roles. Because of that work, which would gonna take a couple of days, months, weeks, they said that they had imagined that I would have interviews with people. I said, yeah. And so they were like, we're gonna send you a list of people. I'm like, can I ask a specific set of people? I said, okay. So I said, I would like to speak to the people who are always complaining, always against everything, the ones who are really the rebels, and the people who, the ones that always are like the pain in the back. I'm like, okay. And then please also invite the people who would otherwise be offended that they are not invited. Because I told them there's no point in inviting and talking with the ones who always say yes to whatever happens.
Mm-hmm.
because they're not going to say no this time, I guess. But I'd rather talk to the ones who are kind of reluctant, who might not necessarily move. So like to understand their perspective.
Yes, I can see the beauty in it, because first of all, you get all the arguments that you need to find an answer to. And very often, in my experience, correct me if you have a different one, those who are the naysayers, who are the complainers, they are complaining and saying no because they don't feel heard.
Because they care.
Yes, they care and they don't feel heard.
Yeah.
And they're usually, yes, they are the ones that are a pain in the butt.
Yes.
But since you come in and you have a fresh mind, you don't know them, you don't judge them. It's the first time you're hearing their stories, so you will listen and take them seriously. And then they feel great, and they might actually be your change makers, change agents inside.
I need them. And so also because they don't feel heard. And this time, imagine that there's this guy who comes in and first thing he does, he has a meeting with them.
Yeah. Yes. It reminds me, I had an interview with someone, I don't remember their name, about with whom having interviews in an organizational change process. And leadership training. And he would say he includes only the A people, the A players in the training, because these are the ones that would actually drive change and outperform. And the B players are usually those that they checked out already, and they're the naysayers. And then it's actually, and they would only, this was an interesting point. He said that the B players in an organization, when you ask them for what are the problems in the organization, they would always point at people and what's not working in order to explain why they are not top performers. While the A players point at the things that structurally don't work and at the real pain points, because they're willing to go the extra mile.
That's interesting.
And I found this perspective very intriguing, actually.
Yeah. Food for thought.
Not saying that the naysayers and the complainers are always the B players, but I think there is some food for thought in there.
Yeah.
You have been facilitating for long and seen many things. What remains your number one facilitation challenge?
My number one facilitation challenge? Oh, I think I have an answer to that.
You seem surprised.
Yes, because I had to think about it for a while. I would say my number one facilitation challenge is to invite the stakeholders in the room. Because sometimes I'm invited to do a workshop for them, but the person who calls me then is not in the room. No, I don't want to influence them. So there's that thing. And if that's not the case, and the B side of that record is being asked to do something on behalf of the stakeholder who doesn't have time for me.
Ooh. How do you deal with that?
Well, very awkwardly. And I remember one story, it happened also last year, where they had called me because they said, hey, we're having these people, they're going to get new roles, program manager, officer, program officers, I don't remember exactly their title. They were program managers. And they had heard that quarterly planning was the way to go. So they wanted to do a quarterly planning. I said, okay, for that, you'll need to include everyone, and it's going to take a couple of days. And they're like, we don't have time for that. We want to do a kind of, we want to do a tryout. So we'll just have, and this ties back to what we said earlier on, we'll just have the program managers in the room. And so we'll do the planning together. I'm like, that's probably not going to work. But we'll have half a day with you and the program managers and we'll do the planning. I'm like, okay, fair enough. And so this was asked on behalf of the person who wanted to do the thing. And I tried to meet with that person and I couldn't meet with them to kind of prepare and align on the whole things. And so we came in, 20 people in the room. And basically, I made them talk to one another based on their expectations for the day and so on. And after 15 minutes of kind of shared conversations, I said, okay, now based on what you heard, what is the main thing that I would need to know?
Mm.
And then a couple of people said, I heard many people tell me that they're not sure about what their role is like, and roles and responsibilities are not clear, and so on and so forth. And then one person said, it's important that we plan today. So, the director was in the room in that on that thing. And so basically I said, okay, so I hear confusion around the roles and responsibilities. And I hear also that we need the plan, which was the initial title for the workshop, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I said, we have half a day. There's no way we're going to do both. So, since everyone is sitting down, I will ask if you think that we should clarify the roles of responsibility rather than plan. I'll count to 3 and you stand up. If you think we should plan, you remain seated. I counted to 3. And then 80% of the 20 people, that means 16 if I'm not mistaken, stood up. The IT director remained seated. So then I said, okay, well, it seems like there's some confusion on responsibilities. I'll have a short break and then we'll focus on that. So I threw away all the rest of what I had planned. And then I started to say, okay, now I need to find activities that make sense so that they can clarify their roles and responsibilities.
Yeah. Fascinating. How did your hiring client react?
He told me, in the room? Yeah. So he told me it was a waste of time. The interesting thing is that he had invited some people from the business, and there were also some people from the IT, but the people from the business and the people from the IT, many of them came to me and told me that this was so valuable because this was like addressing the elephant in the room.
Mm.
And it would be great if it was a beautiful story and they all lived happily ever after. But the person who had contacted me was really also into continuing this and said, we need to continue as this is happening right now. So we can't let this slide.
Yeah.
And they tried to reach out to the director. I tried too. And basically they let it slide and contacted me 7 months later to ask for a follow-up. And it was a bit late because then people didn't really trust that anything could be done anymore.
Yeah, which is...
So, I don't know what kind of lessons to take out of that. I still think that it's important to put the needs of the group forward, to make them obvious. And yes, that might mean that some hiring clients might not be happy with it. But then also, again, how much time do we spend together to prepare these? So, I think there's many, many different parameters in the success or the failure of a workshop. Maybe another one to add to the thing.
Misalignment.
Yeah.
On the real purpose. And I think it's such a beautiful example because I think many of us have been in this or a similar situation. And asking to go ahead for a strategy planning workshop where those who are in the room aren't clear about their roles and responsibilities. How can you make a strategic plan?
I mean, you can make one.
Yeah, but then who is going to execute it if you don't know the roles and responsibilities?
Exactly.
And then you distribute tasks to people that then won't be done.
Yes.
So this is a much higher risk. And then I think it's an interesting thought process, also responsibility of the facilitator. You could go for the quick win with your hiring client. Okay, we do what you wanted us to do. You get paid. But then they wonder why nothing happens afterwards. Mm-hmm. Or you go the more difficult path of, okay, we first need to discuss roles and responsibilities. Maybe they don't want to hire you directly after, but 7 months later, they realize, oh, actually, the work he's done wasn't so bad.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's the thing, as someone who's self-employed, the story I tell myself is that I can't afford going for the quick wins and being paid and then voila.
Yes.
So the story I tell myself is I'd rather take the risk and do what I think the group needs.
Yeah.
Even though it might mean that I lose clients, That's more clients for other people. Hooray. Uh, but it might mean that I lose contracts and so on. But I don't see myself, compromising on that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it's a question of integrity at the end.
Yeah.
Because we are there to be in service of the group, I believe. And the group is bigger than the hiring client.
Yeah.
Also, so I have a background in behavioral economics, which is basically game theory, right?
Okay.
And the idea there would be that if we, as a profession, we have to make sure that the groups we facilitate can trust that as soon as there's a facilitator stepping into the room, we're in service of the group more than of the client, because otherwise we'll lose this trust. So in the next periods, in a repeated game where we have different facilitators stepping in front of the same group, if they think that we might facilitate them or not care about their needs, then they will lose the trust in workshops as a tool.
Yes.
And then it's a lost game for all of us in the long term.
Yeah, and thank you for bringing up facilitating, because it's also a topic that's come lately when I'm teaching facilitation to managers. They're like, oh, but, how can we, at some point we have some objectives that we need to reach. And how can we facilitate that? And this is where I discussed, if you're facilitating them to get them to an outcome that's already prepared, don't do that. However, if you would like them to understand what's already been decided and to do some facilitation around, hey, this is what has already been decided, but you can learn about it in a facilitated way, then you can do it. But it's really important that you clarify what it is that you're trying to do with the group.
Yes. Thank you so much for making this point.
Yeah.
Because it's also, I think, it's so important that even if the decision has been made already, it doesn't mean that we cannot facilitate or that it's hopeless to work with a group. It's exactly. Just we have to do different things with them.
Yeah. And a friend of mine, Vincent Hardet, who teaches in a nursing school in Rennes, he told me that, so when he goes to the third year students, there's this whole process for blood transfusion, right? It's been codified. It's been really well defined. But what he does is he tells his students, hey, based on what you already know from your work and everything, try and come up with a process for blood transfusion. And then they kind of compare it to the official text. And usually he says they're not that far from the official process. And this is not facilitating. This is facilitating understanding of a process that is well defined.
Yes. And it also shows, because if you have tried to crack the code, then you're more curious about the answer, the solution at the end.
Yeah.
And it also shows that, the process as it has been defined does make sense and that the students are smart.
Yeah.
I think it becomes a facilitated process if you're asking the questions and designing a process that will lead to a predefined outcome already.
Yeah.
And that's very wrong.
That's very wrong indeed. And a couple of weeks ago also I was working as a support person, so like a shadow facilitator for someone who's on a learning track. So basically there's this company, Fifth Floor in Belgium, that has asked for a learning track for their facilitators. And then one of the founders said, we've worked on the purpose and the mission of our organization, and we want to share it in a facilitated way. So one of the folks who's on the track said, I'm going to do it. And we discussed that I would be there as a shadow, But the really interesting thing is that was also a process where they said, hey, basically, this is what we came up with. But tell us stories to see how that resonates or not, and so on. So basically, they made a whole group process to kind of also see, is what we came up with totally, is it roughly in line with what people think or not? Yeah.
And then everyone can connect to them.
Yeah.
And I think I had a few conversations recently about the difference between facilitation and manipulation, where I think that facilitators are manipulators.
Yes.
So we do manipulate the group in the sense that we design a process and we help them to come to an outcome, where the difference is that the outcome is not predefined.
Yeah, and I think it was you were talking about Thomas Landthaler, and I think he wrote something about it a couple of weeks ago. And yes, we are manipulators in the sense like I am currently, and if you're watching this on YouTube, manipulating this bottle, I'm holding it.
Yeah.
But manipulating is a neutral word. Of course, forcing somebody to go to a specific outcome, this is manipulation in the bad sense.
Yeah.
But as you said, if the outcome is not defined, we can design a process, and in that we are manipulators.
Yes. Yeah. And I think as soon as we ask participants to come up with their stories, with their understanding, with their solutions related to something we have given them, then we don't know the outcome because they are the creators of their stories, of their solutions, their answers.
Yeah.
But then asking them, having the guiding principles of the organization already defined, putting them in a cupboard, and then asking the group, okay, you in a workshop, you come up with the guiding principles, and at the end, ta-da!
Yeah, that's so wrong.
That's very wrong. Yeah. You've related in a recent post on LinkedIn to the magic of facilitation.
Yes.
And I would be very curious to what you mean by that. And where do you see the similarities or maybe the differences between a facilitator and a magician?
Okay. So knowing that this will mostly be a podcast that people will listen to and not watch, I will not perform a magic trick. Sorry for those who watch this video on YouTube. I might still, but I think shall I? Maybe?
Yeah, and then we put the timestamp in.
Okay, so I will do a magic trick, but now I have already revealed that I will do one. But let's just figure it out. So, Miriam, can you tell me what this card is? I've got two playing cards in my hands, right?
Yes. One, I can see the number. It's a 9 of Caro, the red one, which is not hard.
Diamonds.
Diamond,
9 of diamonds.
9 of diamonds. The other one I don't see.
What do you see in my other hand?
It's a back of a card which is red.
Okay. So you want to see maybe what that card is?
Absolutely.
Okay, so there it is. So here, I flip the cards, right? Mm-hmm. And in my left hand now, I have the
2 of spades.
2 of spades. And what do you see in my... sorry, not the 2 of spades. That's 2 of clubs.
2 of clubs. I'm so bad.
We're learning English. You should do it in German, maybe.
Yes. So the 2 of clubs and the other card that used to be the 9 of diamonds is flipped.
You see the back now, right?
Yeah.
So I'm going to flip them again. So in my left hand, I have... What do you see in my left hand?
The back of a card, which is still red.
Yeah. And here?
I see again the 9 of diamonds.
Okay, so I have the 9 of diamonds in my right hand, and in my left hand I have
the 3 of clubs.
It's the 2 of clubs, but that's fine. It's already a magic trick without even starting. I'm going to put the 9 of diamonds behind my head. And so this, in my other hand, in my left hand, I still have the
3 of clubs.
It's a 2, but that's okay. But
it's a 2 of clubs.
You didn't pay attention. You see, the 2 of clubs is now in my right hand.
Wow.
And it was the 9 of diamonds that was here.
Wow.
See?
Yes.
So what has happened here? Magic, right? I'm going to ask you a couple of questions just because it's important. So if this is the 9 of diamonds,
yes.
What's this card? The other card in my other hand.
The 2 of clubs.
What makes you say so? Because currently you see the back of a card, right?
Yeah. The experience of what I've seen before.
Okay. So I'm going to flip this card around. Are you ready?
Yes.
Miriam?
Oh, and now it's the back of a card again. And the back of a card. And the other one is the numbered cards independent of... So it doesn't have a back of a card.
Well, it has a back.
Yes,
so
but,
like one card.
it's not the... Jeez, I'm so confusing. Sorry, audience.
No, that's fine. That's fine. Sorry, Miriam. But like basically, indeed, you saw one double-backed card.
Yeah.
And another one, which is a double face card, which has two different faces on a single card.
Mm.
So what does that illustrate? It's a question for you.
That it's easy to trick, to show something that seems real but is not, or to hide some components or artifacts.
Yeah. Another thing I also loved is that you said, when I asked you, hey, what makes you say so, that this is this card or the other card, you said, my experience of what I've seen.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe you didn't even think that there could be double-backed and double-faced cards.
Yeah.
So this is also about learning that some things that we didn't know were possible could be possible.
Yes.
And so what I wrote on that LinkedIn post was also that when we go to see a magic show, we know that they are not real magicians. I mean, we know that. And you seem to like nod your head. I'm not going to tell you anything about Santa, but so we know that. But still, we are ready to believe that what happens is magic. And so if we as facilitators can create the space for people to come into a room and instead of saying, yeah, that's not going to work, for a moment, try and come in a space where anything could be possible because of the whole ingredients, because of this whole suspension of disbelief, because of, hey, let's for a moment pretend like we could figure this out. So that's one thing. I see that a huge smile on your face.
Yeah, and what I hear is this creation of hope and of seeing possibilities where before there didn't see some, and just diving into the realm of possibility.
Yeah, and another thing which is critical is this trick has been taught to me by Tyagi many years ago, and Tyagi ran a lot of programs during lockdown, and I think I went to all of them. I really wanted to learn so much from him, and he had taught me that. He even sent me those cards, and then once he knew that I had the cards, he asked me, "Hey, Charles, will you facilitate this trick?" And I was like, there was a whole group there that I didn't even know, and he was like, "Why was he picking on me?" And I failed. I wasn't sure what I had done, and it took me a while to get the trick working and to be able to do it even for a podcast recording on audio or whatever. And what the takeaway that I take from this as well is, in order to facilitate and to hold the space, I can practice this magic trick in front of a mirror. The real trick will be when I do it in front of a live human. Whether a kid, a teenager, a podcast host, or a group of people. I mean, this is feeling confident about being able to hold the space, and that whatever happens, maybe the person I'm facilitating it to knows the trick. So how do I adapt to that while still making it valuable and relevant?
Yeah, beautiful.
So there's some work.
Yeah, especially in the last part. If someone knows the trick, how can you help them to pass the, oh, I know this already, to it's okay, and now dig deeper. So what is the learning? How can you apply this knowledge to the situation now? Yeah, and that's similar in facilitation. So if you have a group, oh, I know this activity already. Oh, we've done that so many times. Yes, and how can you apply it differently? How can you look deeper? Thank you.
My pleasure. These are, for me, a couple of similarities between magic and facilitation. Yeah, and
I think the playing with the illusion and the hope.
And the hope.
And the hope.
It's really hope, yeah.
I like that.
Yeah, me too.
Thank you for this magical conversation.
Thanks for the invitation, Miriam. It was really delightful. Loved all the back and forth ideas and insights.
Yeah, it was really nicely unpacking. Like Christmas.
Oh, yeah. There you go.
Here we go. Magic.
One day I'm going to tell you something about Santa, but not today.
Oh, please don't. Wonderful.
Oh.
It was never so pleasurable to seem extremely stupid on my podcast.
Yeah.
So audience, please invite me. Don't invite me to a poker session.
Hey, you had asked me for the magic trick. Huh?
Yes, and I don't regret it. I think it was very interesting. And I will put the timestamp in the show notes so that everyone can check out the YouTube recording.
Oh, yeah. Great.
Beautiful. And I will put your contact details in the show notes for anyone to reach out to you.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you for staying tuned and for listening until the very end. I hope that you found the inspiration and the wisdom that you are looking for. And I hope that you will subscribe to the show so that you never miss any of the interviews with another inspiring facilitator from across the world. I'm devoted to continue this podcast and to deliver weekly an episode that maintains the quality that you expect and you deserve. And if you would like to help me to maintain this quality and to keep the podcast free, please help us. Visit workshops.work/support to make a small donation to keep the podcast free. Thank you so much. I hope to be in your ears next week.